The playoffs are here, and you can predict the action all the way to the finals with FanDuel Predicts. Predict the spread, the total points, and even the game-winning moments that make the playoffs. Sign up and get a $25 bonus with FanDuel Predicts.
Offered by FanDuel Prediction Markets, LLC, a registered futures commission merchant. 18-plus bonus is non-withdrawable and expires 7 days after receipt. Trading derivatives involves significant risk and may not be suitable for all investors. Manage your activity with their consumer protection tools. Restrictions apply. See terms at FanDuel.com/predicts/bonus-offer-terms.
Listen, all you New Yorkers.
Yippee! Taxi!
Okay, man, we're looking around.
This is the 77 WABC minicast.
Let me ask you this question without putting the focus of the spotlight in an unfair way. How would you feel, in your opinion, how is this whole universe constructed? I mean, you're talking about constructal law, and Morgan Freeman, of course, in his excellent iteration there into the wormhole, he posed those particular questions. Where were we and why we are here? What's your take on this? I mean, may I ask you, do you subscribe to more of a religious part of the equation, or would you say more science? And we welcome the answer that you'll give us.
I subscribe to the honest thought and the honest answer that stands on verifiable statements. And that's basically my approach to any discussion in a company of people. The configuration of this outer space, I kind of laugh at the question because if you have more than 5 minutes to listen to me, I'll tell you the story of how I'm no longer surprised by this architecture in the sky. It began with, so give me 5 minutes, I'll tell you chronologically. One of the first predictions I made by invoking the constructor law in the late 90s was the configuration of the mud cracks, wet ground, blown by the drying wind, experiences drying. It is shrinking, and before cracking, this volume is in a state of uniform internal tension, and with the more and more wind blowing, these cracks occur. And Adrian said, "Well, why do they occur?" Well, because of the constructive law, which predicts that if water vapor is to come out of the ground faster, it needs evolution, meaning a design that did not exist before. And that design is the pattern of cracks. And there's a whole chapter to present about how those patterns change predictably according to the speed of the wind and the temperature and the humidity of the wind. But that was the beginning. And
that's interesting.
And then, yeah. So then I come to your domain, Dr. Sky. Do we know another volume that is in a state of uniform tension? The answer is yes. It is the so-called primordial soup. It is suspension of solid particles, uniform size, and uniform spacing between these particles. And the particles attract each other. That is the tension. This entire volume is in tension. And but given the chance to relieve itself, meaning to create its own cracks, it has the phenomenon of accretion, which means that two particles coalesce and form a bigger particle. So the problem I proposed to myself was the following. I have a suspension of uniform small particles, and next, of course, because of accretion, I have a suspension of uniform larger particles. Well, that is actually not the end of my imagination, because I can also imagine a suspension of some bigger particles interspaced with still small particles. Which configuration is reached faster by this volume that's in internal tension? And the answer is the configuration with a few large and many small. In other words, So that is design, and it comes from the constructor law, because the constructor law is about the time arrow of the change in configuration. So if you with this particular first step or discovery, which is in my mind, I'm not showing you a movie, I can imagine this process of bigger and fewer things forming, celestial bodies.
Yes.
In a company of small things, and then if you look here, if you imagine two of these bigger bodies, and then around them small bodies, a small body will be attracted by the two big bodies. But because the small one is the one that does the movement.
But Doctor, I must cut in here because time is of the essence. And again, I appreciate your eloquence and your depth of knowledge on this. One of the things I'd like to tie in to bring both of you and I into the same environment here is that studying the subject of astronomy and astrophysics, and the people out in the audience probably know this, if you look at the creation of this universe 13.77 billion years ago, you see even bigger galactic systems, and I'm going in accordance with your constructor law, that if you took the simple analogy of taking like a river and seeing at the end of that river, in some cases, they go to these deltas, it branches out. Trees, when they start off, they branch out. This is what we see on the large galactic scale. We see these tendrils of material throughout the universe, and I'm talking billions of galaxies long, billions of light years long. So what you're bringing up here is so fascinating because, I would love to be in one of your classes, as I'm sure many of the people who are listening to the show right now. But we do have a full board of callers here, and I'm going to try to get as many. Again, I like to look at this role as being like a, flight. You were sitting here navigating airplanes coming in. They have to come in, they have to come out, and they have to do it in a certain time period. So wouldn't you say, in about a minute and a half, that's the time we have, the correlation between what you're talking about this whole structural thing called constructive law, it has a lot to do exactly with the early part of the universe, and you're expanding it out into systems that we may not pay attention to in our daily life. So there must be some grand plan, something from the Creator. Yeah. Right.
No, it's the constructor. By the way, you interrupted me when I was beginning to predict for the audience the formation of the so-called celestial filament. Secondly, with more time to talk, I could tell you why these galaxies and the planetary system in which we live, it has to be plane and not spherical or not cylindrical. All of these configurations are predictable, just like the configuration of the snowflake, which is plane, not a ball. So with time, in fact, these things that I'm name dropping are stories in these books that you cited in the beginning. There are also problems and let's say lectures in my textbooks for the students. All of this is available, and it is available to individuals who get the idea or the habit of critical thinking, questioning.
Yes. Doctor, I love the words you just used because in many people's opinions, and I'm not going to pontificate here, even though I'm the host of the show, and glad to be it and honored to be behind the microphone, but more important than that is this whole concept of critical thinking. We don't see a lot of it in daily life. Common sense is another thing that seems to be, we're not going to get political right now, but we don't have that in many cases here, and it would be great if the schools out there were teaching this whole discourse on critical thinking and the things of that nature.